The axe fell with a hollow thunk, echoing across the desolate Wyoming landscape. Catherine Morgan paused, her breath clouding white in the bitter January air of 1876. 25 degrees below zero since sundown. The wolves had been circling for 2 nights now, their howls growing bolder as they sensed weakness. Her half-finished cabin stood on the ridge like a wound against the steel-gray sky, its roof partially open to the elements, its walls gaping and incomplete. Catherine's muscles screamed in protest as she swung the axe again. The cold burned her lungs with each ragged breath. At this temperature, death came within hours without proper shelter. A person's lungs would freeze from the inside out. Blood would thicken until the heart strained to pump it. These were facts Catherine knew like her own name. Facts that made her lift the axe once more, despite muscles pushed far beyond endurance. The howl came first, closer than before. Then the gray shadows materializing from the tree line. 5, no, 6 wolves, eyes gleaming with hunger, moving with deliberate purpose toward her isolated position. Catherine gripped the axe tighter, her knuckles white. She wouldn't run. There was nowhere to go. She wouldn't beg. No one would hear. She would face death standing, weapon in hand. The lead wolf crouched, preparing to spring. The crack of a rifle split the frozen air. The wolf dropped. 2 more shots followed in quick succession, each finding its mark. The remaining wolves scattered, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Catherine whirled, axe raised high, ready to fight a new threat. A rider sat motionless on the ridge, silhouetted against the snow-heavy clouds. A big man on a powerful horse, his Winchester Model 1873 still raised, barrel smoking in the frigid air. He lowered the weapon slowly, assessing her with a calculated gaze. A woman alone in this wilderness has 2 choices, the stranger called, his voice carrying across the distance. Die or become hard as steel. I see you've chosen the latter. He dismounted without waiting for a response, boots crunching in the snow as he approached. His movements were efficient, deliberate, a man accustomed to harsh conditions. He wore a thick sheepskin coat, well worn but of good quality, a cavalry hat pulled low over ice-blue eyes that had seen too much. That's close enough, Catherine warned, axe still raised. The man stopped, nodded once in acknowledgement. Matthew Grant, he said simply. I didn't ask. A ghost of a smile touched his weathered face. No, you didn't. His gaze swept over the half-built cabin, the meager pile of timber, the thin wisp of smoke from her struggling fire. You'll be dead in 48 hours if this storm hits as hard as it's promising. I didn't ask for your assessment either. Matthew Grant studied her. A slender woman with determination etched into every line of her body, wielding an axe with hands raw and bleeding from work and cold. I have a proposition, he said finally. I'm not interested. Not offering charity, ma'am. A fair exchange. He gestured to the scattered timber. I can finish this cabin properly. Roof, door, sealed against the wind. Pay you $20 a week. Catherine's eyes narrowed with suspicion. For what? I need a mother for my girls. 8 and 6. My wife died 2 years back. His voice remained steady, but something flickered behind those ice-blue eyes. 1-month trial. You keep house, teach them reading and writing. After 30 days, if it suits us both, marriage. Legal, straightforward, respectable. You'd have my name, protection. They'd have a mother. Catherine's bitter laugh cut through the cold air. You don't know me. Know enough. His gaze held hers, unwavering. You're still swinging that axe when most would have quit. That tells me what I need to know. He pulled a bundle from his saddlebag, set it on a nearby stump. Dried beef, medicines, a thick wool blanket. Think on it. I'll return at first light. As he mounted his horse, Catherine found her voice again. What's your name? Your full name? Matthew Grant. He settled in the saddle, adjusting his rifle. The name struck her like a physical blow. Everyone in Elkridge knew that name. Former Union Army scout with deadly accuracy. Quiet rancher who'd kept to himself since his wife's passing. Never caused trouble, never asked for help. And if I say no, then I'll stack your wood proper before I leave, and you'll have my respect as you choose your own path. His eyes met hers once more. But you'll be dead before February, and my girls will still be grieving. We'll both lose what might have saved us. With that, he turned his horse and rode away, hoofbeats fading into the gathering storm. Catherine stood alone in the deepening twilight, the wolves' howls rising once more in the distance. She looked at the bundle he'd left, then at her pitiful cabin, then at the dark sky that promised more suffering to come. Pride wouldn't keep her alive through February. That much was certain. She picked up the bundle and went inside. The wool blanket carried the scent of cedar from his home. Wrapped in its warmth beside her small fire, Catherine Morgan considered what it meant to survive. Matthew Grant returned at first light, wagon loaded with cut timber. Two small figures bundled in wool sat beside him, their faces partially hidden by scarves and hats. Catherine watched from her doorway. No door yet, just canvas nailed crookedly to keep out the worst of the wind. She'd eaten the bread, worn the blanket, barely slept. The meat she'd saved in case this was a trick and she needed to run. Matthew helped the girls down from the wagon. They stood close to him, eyes wide in small, solemn faces. "This is Sarah," he said, hand resting lightly on the older girl's shoulder. "She's 8. The child had his dark hair, his serious expression, his watchful eyes. "And Emma, she's 6. The younger girl clutched a rag doll missing one button eye, regarding Catherine with a mixture of hope and fear. Catherine knelt in the snow, bringing herself to their eye level. "Morning." Emma's lip trembled. Sarah put an arm around her sister protectively. "We don't bite," Sarah said, though her voice shook. "Good," Catherine replied softly. "Neither do I." Matthew cleared his throat. "Here's the terms, plain and simple. 1 month's trial. You keep house, teach the girls their letters. I'll finish this cabin, roof door, proper floor. Pay you $20 a week plus room and board at my place." Catherine's eyes widened slightly. $20 was more than most men made in a month. "After 30 days, Matthew continued, if it suits us both, I'll ask you proper. Marriage, legal and binding. You'd have my name, protection. The girls would have a mother." His eyes never left hers, steady and serious. No hint of impropriety or false promise. A business arrangement, nothing more. "And if I say yes now, then change my mind, then you leave with what I promised. A man's word is his bond." His jaw tightened. Judge a horse by its eyes, a man by his word. Her father used to say something similar, back when Catherine still had a father. Emma stepped forward suddenly, her small voice piercing the cold morning. "Please, miss, we forgot what mothers sound like." Sarah elbowed her. "Emma, hush." "It's true," Emma whispered, eyes wide with childish honesty. "We did." Catherine looked at Matthew. His jaw was tight, eyes distant. A man drowning in grief and trying not to let his children see. She stood, brushing snow from her skirt. 1 month. 1 month? Matthew agreed, nodding once. Before they departed, Matthew reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a Colt Navy 1851 revolver, checking it methodically before offering it to Catherine. "Can you shoot?" he asked. She took the weapon, feeling its weight. "My father taught me. Before—" Matthew nodded, understanding what remained unsaid. "Aim true and don't hesitate. A wolf won't give you a second chance." He demonstrated the proper loading technique, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Neither will some men. The significance wasn't lost on her. This wasn't just about wolves. "I couldn't protect my wife when she needed me," Matthew said quietly, meant for her ears alone. "Won't let that happen to anyone under my roof again." They gathered her few possessions, spare dress, her mother's Bible, the axe, and loaded them into the wagon. The girls made space, sitting close together but not touching Catherine. As they drove toward the valley, she saw Elkridge below, windows glowing against the morning sky. Her stomach nodded. "That town already buried me once," she said quietly. Matthew glanced at her. "Let them try again. This time you have someone standing with you." The wagon creaked on. Emma reached out, touched Catherine's hand with just her fingertips, testing. Catherine didn't pull away. Sarah watched, said nothing, but something in her face softened, just barely. Matthew Grant's ranch was modest but solid. 3 rooms, clean but cold, like it waited for something, or someone, to bring warmth back. The girls shared a loft bedroom. Catherine had a small room off the kitchen with a narrow bed and a window that faced east. Matthew slept downstairs near the fire like he was guarding something precious. The first days passed in careful silence. Catherine cooked simple meals: beans, cornbread, stew. The girls were polite but distant, calling her Miss Catherine. They kept their grief close, like a shield. Each morning before dawn, Matthew would take Catherine behind the barn, teaching her to shoot with greater accuracy. "Harlow has hired guns," he explained, watching her reload the Colt. "Best you're always ready." "Harlow?" Catherine asked, squinting down the barrel at the target he'd set up. "Victor Harlow. Owns the Falcon Mining Company." Matthew's face hardened. "Among other things." Catherine's finger froze on the trigger. "The mine where my husband died." Matthew nodded once. "The same." She fired, the bullet striking dead center. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because knowledge is another kind of weapon." Matthew took the Colt, demonstrating a faster reloading technique. "And you deserve to be well armed." Inside the house, Catherine established routines. She mended the girls' dresses, braided Sarah's hair when asked, read to them from the McGuffey reader at night. Sarah, she discovered, had a quick mind for figures. Emma showed talent for drawing, creating small pictures that she would leave on Catherine's pillow. Hesitant offerings of friendship. Matthew worked from dawn until dusk, chopping wood, tending horses, riding out to check cattle. He spoke little, but his actions were eloquent. He brought fresh water without being asked, fixed the wobbly kitchen chair, left wildflowers on the table one morning, winter-blooming prairie smoke he'd found sheltered under a rock outcropping. On the 5th night, a blizzard came screaming down from the mountains. Wind rattled the windows. Snow piled against the door. They huddled by the fire, girls in nightgowns, Catherine mending a torn sleeve, Matthew cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. Sarah woke from a doze, looked at her father with unexpected directness. "Papa, why do you still wear Mama's ring?" The cleaning rod in Matthew's hand stopped moving. Silence stretched, broken only by the fire's crackle. "Because I wasn't there when she needed me," he said finally, voice flat as the prairie. "Working at a ranch 3 days' ride away, chasing money we didn't need. Came home to a grave and 2 babies who didn't understand why their papa had left them." His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as he resumed cleaning the rifle. "It wasn't your fault, Papa," Sarah said, eyes filling with tears. "Wasn't hers either, but I carry it anyway." Catherine set down her mending, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "Town says I killed my husband," she said quietly. Everyone looked at her. "Says I drove him to dangerous work in the mines because I wanted more than a poor man could give. James died in a collapse. They said I was cursed, too ambitious for a woman. That God took him as punishment for my pride." Her hands twisted the fabric. "Maybe they're right." Emma slid off her chair, crossed to Catherine, climbed into her lap without asking. "You're not cursed," the child whispered. "You're warm." Catherine's arms came around the small body, and something in her chest broke open. She bent her head, breathed in the scent of child soap and innocence and hope. Sarah moved closer too, leaned against Catherine's shoulder. Matthew watched them, his face stone-like, but his eyes were wet. The storm howled. The fire burned. The four of them sat in a knot of shared grief and tentative healing. Morning came quiet, the world white and clean. Matthew went to his saddlebag, pulled out the gold ring, held it a long moment, then wrapped it in cloth and put it away. "Can't build forward looking backward," he said simply. Catherine nodded. She understood. They'd crossed an invisible line. The arrangement wasn't business anymore. It was becoming something real. 2 weeks into their arrangement, rumors reached Victor Harlow that Matthew Grant had taken in the Morgan widow. The same widow whose husband had died in the mine collapse, the collapse that 6 other men hadn't survived either. Harlow dispatched 2 hired guns to Grant's ranch with a message. "She's not good for your reputation, Grant." Matthew met them in the yard, rifle in hand. "My reputation isn't your concern." Mr. Harlow disagrees. You're business partners, after all. Catherine, listening from inside, felt the blood drain from her face. Business partners? Matthew and Harlow? That night, after the girls were asleep, Catherine confronted Matthew in the kitchen. "You're partners with the man who destroyed my life." Matthew sat heavily at the table. "I own half the mines, most of the cattle land, and the bank," he admitted. "But I walked away from managing any of it after Elizabeth died. Gave Harlow full control." "You're the richest man in the territory," Catherine whispered, stunned. "On paper." Matthew's eyes met hers. "Doesn't feel rich. Felt broken for 2 years." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. "You needed to know before you decide. You'd want for nothing. House in town if you prefer. School for the girls. Whatever you need." Catherine stood abruptly, paced the small kitchen. "You're offering me a fortune, and I can't even offer you an untarnished name." "I'm offering family," Matthew corrected, rising too. "Name's just a word. Not to them, not to the town." Catherine's voice cracked. "They'll say I trapped you, that I'm a gold digger who—" "Let them say it," Matthew interrupted. "I know the truth." "Do you?" Catherine whispered. "Because I don't. I don't know if I'm doing this for shelter, or for you, or because those girls looked at me like I was their last hope, and I couldn't. I couldn't walk away." Matthew crossed the room, stood close but didn't touch. Why not all of those reasons? Something passed between them, something neither was ready to name. "I've been going through the account books," Matthew said quietly. "Things don't add up. Money missing, safety funds diverted. I think Harlow's been stealing from us for years." "From us?" "From everyone. The company, the miners, the town." Matthew's jaw tightened. "I intend to find out exactly what he's done." The next day, Matthew announced they were going to town for supplies. All of them together. "That's not wise," Catherine protested. "You're with me now," Matthew said firmly. "Let them see." The ride to Elkridge took an hour, mostly silent except for Emma's occasional questions about birds or trees. Catherine's stomach churned the whole way. When they rolled down Main Street, curtains twitched. Faces appeared in windows, shock and disapproval evident. At Murphy's General Store, the whispers started immediately. "That Morgan woman thought she'd crawled off to die somewhere decent. What's Grant thinking, bringing her here?" Howard Murphy, the shopkeeper, sneered from behind the counter. "Help you, Grant." Matthew's voice was ice. "Loading up supplies. Put it all on my account." His emphasis was clear. All of it. Catherine stood frozen, uncertain. The girls flanked her, each holding one of her hands. Small, fierce, protective. Murphy's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "As you say," he mumbled. Catherine moved through the store in a daze, selecting flour, sugar, thread. Matthew added a bolt of blue calico without asking her, the finest in the store, and paid without flinching. Outside, a voice called sharply, "Grant!" Victor Harlow stood across the muddy street, expensive suit, calculating eyes. The wealthiest man in the territory, owner of the bank, the mines, including the one where James had died. "Heard you're keeping peculiar company," Harlow said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Interesting choice." Matthew loaded the last crate into the wagon, turned slowly. "My choices aren't your concern, Harlow. When the richest man in the territory associates with a woman of questionable virtue, it becomes everyone's concern." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. Matthew stepped forward, and for a moment, she thought he would strike Harlow. Then Sarah's voice cut through, clear as a bell. "Miss Catherine is good. She teaches us. That's more than you ever did, Mr. Harlow." Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Matthew touched his hat brim, a gesture both polite and dismissive. "We're done here." He helped Catherine into the wagon. They rode out of town in tense silence. Halfway home, Catherine finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Matthew glanced at her. Actions speak, words are wind. Time they learned the difference. While repairing Catherine's cabin as promised, Matthew discovered an old document hidden in the wall, a mine inspection report dated 2 weeks before the collapse that killed James Morgan. It detailed inadequate support beams, poor ventilation, dangerous gas levels. At the bottom was Victor Harlow's signature, acknowledging these conditions and authorizing continued operation without repairs. Matthew rode to find Jacob Perkins, who had survived the collapse that killed 6 others. The man lived alone now, at the edge of town, his lungs permanently damaged by coal dust. "We reported the rotting support beams daily," Perkins confirmed, voice raspy from damaged lungs. "Foreman said Mr. Harlow considered repairs not economically justified at this time." On day 27 of their arrangement, Matthew received a letter from Harlow summoning him to a town meeting about a matter of moral concern. Catherine found it when it slipped from his coat as he hung it by the door. "What's this about?" she asked, holding the envelope. Matthew scanned the contents, his face hardening. "Harlow's called a town meeting, says it's about moral concerns. He means me. I should come with you." "No." Matthew's voice was firm. "It'll only make it worse. Let them say what they need to say. Then I'll come home and ask you proper." Catherine hesitated, then nodded. "Let them say what they need to say. Then come home and ask me." Matthew took her hand, squeezed once. "I will." That evening, Catherine watched Matthew ride toward town, straight-backed and resolute. She'd already decided her answer. Yes, she would marry him. Yes, she would be mother to his girls. Yes, she would build a life here, despite what the town thought. She just needed him to ask. Matthew Grant walked into that town meeting like a man walking to his own hanging. The community hall was packed, every seat taken, people standing along the walls. As he entered, conversations died. Heads turned. Victor Harlow stood before the crowded room, voice carrying. "We have a moral concern," he announced, eyes finding Matthew's. "Samuel Grant, our wealthiest, most respected citizen, plans to marry a woman of questionable virtue. Eleanor Morgan, a woman whose husband died under suspicious circumstances, who was cast out for good reason." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded in agreement. "She's after his money," a woman said loudly. "Mrs. Fletcher, the preacher's wife. Those innocent girls deserve better." "It's unseemly," another voice added. "Indecent." Matthew's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. The old fear rose like floodwater. What if he chose wrong again? What if he failed them like he failed Elizabeth? The room waited. His silence thundered. Harlow smiled slightly. "Nothing to say, Grant?" Matthew tried again, but the words stuck in his throat. The faces before him blurred. He turned and walked out, the sound of whispers following him into the night. But instead of returning to the ranch, Matthew rode straight to the county seat. He had failed Catherine once tonight. He would not fail her again. He needed evidence, official records that would expose Harlow's criminal negligence. The ride home was endless, each hoofbeat hammering guilt into Matthew's spine. Catherine was waiting on the porch, shawl wrapped tight against the cold. She saw his face and knew. "You didn't stand for me," she said. "Not accusation, just fact." "Catherine, let me explain. You taught me actions speak, words are wind." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were dying. "I understand." "No, you don't." Matthew dismounted. "I failed you tonight, but I rode to the county courthouse. I have the inspection records, the proof that Harlow knew. They asked you to choose." Catherine cut him off. "You chose silence. That's an answer, too." She went inside, came back with her bag already packed. The girls appeared behind her, still in nightgowns. "Mama Catherine, where are you going?" Emma's voice was small and frightened. "Don't call me that." Catherine's voice broke. "I'm not your mama." "Yes, you are." Emma sobbed, clinging to Catherine's skirt. Sarah turned to Matthew, fury in her small face. "You let her go, just like you weren't there for Mama. You're doing it again." Each word a knife. Catherine knelt, held the girls one last time. "You're good girls, the best, but I can't stay where I'm not wanted." "We want you," Emma wailed. "I know, baby, but wanting isn't enough." Catherine stood, walked past Matthew without looking at him, down the road into darkness. Matthew stood paralyzed, his daughters crying, the world crumbling. Sarah grabbed Emma, pulled her inside, slammed the door. Matthew stood alone in the yard, snow beginning to fall again. The cabin he'd built glowed empty on the ridge. The woman he loved was walking into the night. The daughters he'd failed were breaking behind a closed door, and he had no one to blame but himself. 3 days passed, the worst 3 days of Catherine's life since James died. She found an abandoned line shack miles from anywhere. No food, no fire. The cold seeped into her bones, into her heart. She had thought she couldn't hurt more than when her husband died. She'd been wrong. On the third night, the wolves began to circle the shack, their howls growing bolder as they sensed weakness. A knock on the door startled her from half-sleep. She didn't move, certain she'd imagined it. The knock came again, louder. "Catherine Morgan, open this door or I'm coming through it." Not Matthew's voice, a woman's. Catherine crawled to the door, fingers numb, and fumbled with the frozen latch. When she pulled it open, an elderly couple stood there, Moses and Ruth Wilson from the outskirts of town. They ran a small farm, kept to themselves. Ruth pushed inside, carrying a pot of stew that steamed in the frigid air. Moses followed with blankets and firewood. "Fool girl," Ruth scolded, setting down her burden. "Trying to die out here like some tragic heroine." "I'm not—" "Hush! Eat!" Ruth ladled stew into a tin cup, pressed it into Catherine's shaking hands. The warmth burned against her frozen fingers. Moses built a fire with quick, practiced movements. Soon the small shack filled with blessed heat and the smell of beef and potatoes. "Matthew Grant's been riding day and night looking for you," Moses said, settling on a rickety stool. "Man's half mad with it." Catherine shook her head, swallowing a spoonful of stew. "He had his chance." "Did he?" Ruth sat beside her on the narrow cot. "Or did he have a moment of human fear?" "I don't understand." "Moses was there at the meeting. Tell her husband." Moses leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "Harlow had the whole town worked up against you before Grant even arrived. Had testimonials from people claiming you'd driven James to his death, doctored letters, false witnesses. And Grant believed them? No. But when he tried to speak, Harlow shouted him down, called him besotted, manipulated, said you were after his money, had the preacher's wife stand up and say you were a danger to his girls. Moses shook his head. It was ugly, Mrs. Morgan. And when Grant couldn't get a word in, he left, but not before telling Harlow he'd see him in hell first. Catherine stared at the fire. He still left without defending me. He left to find proof, Ruth said gently. Rode straight to the county seat to pull inspection records on that mine. Hasn't slept since. Hope flickered painfully in Catherine's chest. Proof of what? That Harlow knew the mine was dangerous, that he covered it up and blamed the widows to protect himself. Moses met her eyes. I used to work those mines, Mrs. Morgan. I was there when they pulled your James out. Harlow fired me the next day when I asked questions about the missing support beams. Understanding dawned. You have testimony. I do, and so do others if they weren't afraid of Harlow. Catherine looked at them, these strangers who had saved her life. Why help me? You don't know me. Know enough, Ruth said, echoing Matthew's words from what seemed a lifetime ago. You're still fighting when most would have quit. That's all we need to know. A sound outside made them all turn. Hoofbeats approaching fast. Moses went to the window, peered out, then smiled. Speaking of fighting men. The door burst open. Matthew stood there, snow coating his shoulders, his face haggard from sleeplessness. His eyes found Catherine, and everything else fell away. You're alive, he whispered. Catherine stood, the blanket falling, forgotten to the floor. You came. I'll always come for you. Ruth touched her husband's arm. We'll give them privacy, Moses. As the older couple slipped out, Catherine and Matthew faced each other across the firelit shack. 3 days of desperation and revelation hanging between them. I have proof, Matthew said hoarsely. Inspection reports, witness statements. Harlow knew that mine would collapse. He let those men die, then blamed their widows when they asked questions. Catherine took a step toward him. Why didn't you tell me this before? Pride. Matthew's shoulders sagged. Shame. I was his partner. I should have been watching. Should have known. We both carry guilt that isn't ours, Catherine said softly. Matthew crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, took her hands in his. I failed you at that meeting. It won't happen again. Come back with me. Not just to the ranch. Stand with me against Harlow. How? We marry now, tonight, then we face him together, with the truth. The words would come later. For now it was enough that they had found each other again. Dawn came crisp and cold. They rode double on Matthew's horse, Catherine's arms around his waist, her cheek against his back. The world was white and clean around them, like a fresh page waiting to be written. That morning, Samuel Grant and Catherine Morgan exchanged vows at first light, witnessed only by the rising sun. The simple gold band he placed on her finger gleamed in the winter light. The ranch house came into view, smoke rising from the chimney. The door flew open before they reached it. Sarah stood there, Emma behind her, both still in nightgowns despite the late morning hour. Papa, Emma cried, running into the yard despite the cold. Matthew dismounted, caught her up in his arms. Sarah remained in the doorway, eyes fixed on Catherine. You came back, she said, voice small and uncertain. Catherine slid from the horse, approached slowly. I did. Why? Catherine knelt in the snow before her. Because home isn't a place, Sarah. It's people. And you and Emma and your father are my people now. Sarah's face crumpled. She threw herself into Catherine's arms with a sob. Emma joined them, small arms wrapping around Catherine's neck from behind. Over their heads she met Matthew's gaze. His eyes were wet. Girls, he said, voice rough. I need to tell you something important about why Miss Catherine left, and why it was my fault, and what we're going to do to fix it. Inside by the fire, Matthew explained in simple terms how Mr. Harlow had done wrong things that hurt people, including Catherine's husband, how Matthew had been afraid to stand up to him, how they were going to face him together with truth. "Will it be dangerous?" Sarah asked, always the practical one. "Not physically," Matthew answered honestly. "But people might say unkind things. They might not understand at first." "I don't care what they say," Emma declared. "Catherine is our mama now." The next morning, Matthew Grant drove the wagon into Elkridge with the rigid posture of a man marching to his own execution. Beside him sat Catherine, now his wife, the simple gold band gleaming on her finger, their marriage document folded carefully in his breast pocket. Behind them, Sarah and Emma sat straight-backed in their Sunday dresses, unusually solemn, understanding without being told that this morning carried weight beyond their young years. The town stirred like a disturbed anthill as they approached. Shopkeepers paused mid-sweep. Women gathering at the water pump turned as one. Men clustered outside Murphy's store fell silent, coffee cups frozen halfway to their lips. Matthew guided the wagon toward the white clapboard church where Reverend Hayes would soon begin Sunday service. Already families approached from side streets, dressed in their finest, Bibles clutched in gloved hands. At the sight of the Grant wagon, their steps faltered, eyes darting between the newcomers and neighbors, seeking cues on how to respond. Matthew brought the horses to a halt before the church steps. He helped Catherine down first, her blue calico dress visible beneath her heavy coat. Next came the girls, Sarah protectively grasping Emma's hand. As Matthew tied the horses, the church door opened. Reverend Hayes emerged, Bible in hand. His weathered face registered surprise, then wariness. "Samuel, this is unexpected." "We've come for Sunday service, Reverend," Matthew's voice carried in the still morning air. "And to ask for God's blessing on our marriage." Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. From the edge of the crowd, Victor Harlow pushed forward, face flushed with fury. "What's the meaning of this, Grant?" he demanded. "Justice," Matthew answered simply. He turned to address the gathering. "I've come to set things right. First, by introducing my wife, Catherine Grant." Harlow's face darkened. "This is inappropriate, Grant. This woman is my lawfully wedded wife as of yesterday," Matthew interrupted, removing the folded document from his pocket, opening it for all to see. "A civil ceremony, witnessed and legal." "Samuel," Reverend Hayes began cautiously, "given the concerns raised at the meeting." "Those concerns were based on lies," Matthew's voice hardened. "Deliberate lies told by Victor Harlow to protect himself from the consequences of his actions." Harlow stepped forward, jaw tight. "This is slander. You've clearly lost your senses over this woman." "I found my senses because of her," Matthew countered. He reached into his coat, withdrew another folded document. "This is a mine inspection report for the Falcon Mine dated April 1st, 1874, 2 weeks before the collapse that killed James Morgan and 5 other men." The crowd grew utterly still. "It details inadequate support beams, poor ventilation, dangerous gas levels," Matthew continued, voice steady. "And at the bottom is Victor Harlow's signature, acknowledging these conditions and authorizing continued operation without repairs." Harlow's face had gone from red to white. "That document is from the county records office," Matthew continued. "The original is now in Sheriff Taylor's hands, along with sworn statements from Moses Wilson, who was fired for raising safety concerns, and Jacob Perkins, who survived the collapse." As if summoned by his name, Moses Wilson stepped forward from the crowd. The old man's voice carried surprising strength. "It's true. I inspected that mine twice in March of '74. Found rotting support beams in the southwest tunnel. Ventilation inadequate in the lower sections. Wrote it all in my reports." His rheumy eyes fixed on Harlow. "Next day, I was fired. No explanation given." Jacob Perkins joined him, a tall man with a miner's stooped shoulders and gnarled, powerful hands. The supports were failing. We all knew it. Told the foreman daily. Bitterness cut through his voice. He said Mr. Harlow was aware, but considered repairs not economically justified at this time. 6 good men died because timber cost too much. These accusations are absurd, Harlow sputtered, composure cracking. The mine collapse was a tragic accident. No accident, Matthew interrupted. Criminal negligence. And when the men died, you needed someone to blame. So you targeted the widows, spread rumors that they had pushed their husbands into dangerous work, made them outcasts in their own community. Catherine stepped forward, head high despite the slight tremor in her hand, still clasped in Matthew's. My husband James believed in my dream to build a school. He took that mining job because it paid better, yes. Her voice was clear, carrying to the farthest listener. But he died not because of my ambition, but because the mine he trusted to be safe wasn't. Her gaze swept the crowd. And I wasn't the only one. 5 other women lost husbands in that collapse. All of us blamed, shunned, our reputations destroyed. While the true culprit walked free among you, respected and enriched. A movement at the edge of the crowd caught Matthew's attention. Sheriff Taylor approached, badge gleaming in the morning light. The crowd parted for him like water. Grant, Taylor nodded curtly. Got those documents you mentioned. County clerk confirmed they're genuine. He patted his coat pocket. Been looking through the evidence all night. Got some questions need answering. Harlow's eyes darted between them, calculating. This is a misunderstanding. Business decisions require difficult choices. Choosing profit over men's lives isn't a business decision, Matthew said coldly. It's a criminal one. Reverend Hayes stepped between them, face grave. These are serious accusations, Victor. If true, they require more than just business remedies. Justice, Matthew agreed, which is why I've dissolved our partnership, effective immediately. The bank, the mines, the cattle operations, I'm taking full control. Harlow's face contorted with rage. His hand moved to his coat, and in that moment, Matthew saw the gleam of metal. A derringer, small but deadly at close range. Matthew moved with the reflexes of a former scout, shoving Catherine behind him as Harlow raised the weapon. The crack of gunfire split the Sunday morning quiet. Harlow staggered, a red stain blossoming on his shoulder. Matthew's Colt smoked in his hand. You're under arrest, Harlow, Sheriff Taylor said, drawing his own weapon, for attempted murder, and a whole lot more we'll be discussing at my office. The weeks following Harlow's arrest brought changes to Elkridge at a pace that left townsfolk breathless. Matthew stepped forward to take control of the businesses he'd once co-owned with Harlow, addressing panicked depositors at the bank, reassuring nervous miners, stabilizing operations that threatened to collapse from Harlow's sudden absence. The bank remains solvent, he announced to a crowded town hall meeting 3 days after Harlow's arrest. Every dollar deposited is secure. The mines will continue operating, but with new safety standards that exceed territorial requirements. No one will lose their job because of Harlow's actions. While Matthew dealt with business matters, Catherine faced a different challenge. The Sunday confrontation had cleared her name, but healing wounds inflicted over 2 years would take more than a single revelation. She felt it in the sidelong glances from some townsfolk, heard it in conversations that halted when she approached Murphy's store. Give them time, Ruth Wilson advised over tea at the ranch house. People don't like admitting they were wrong. Makes them feel foolish. Catherine's cabin, once a desperate shelter, now expanded under Matthew's careful direction. A proper classroom added, windows to catch the eastern light, desks crafted by his own hands. The town contributed too. Howard Murphy donated lumber. Jacob Perkins offered his carpentry skills. Other men brought tools and labor on weekends. Why help? Catherine asked Murphy one afternoon as he delivered a wagon load of glass panes. The shopkeeper shifted uncomfortably. Seems right. Making amends, I suppose. Besides, town needs a school. Kids getting wild as jackrabbits without proper learning. By May, a sign hung above the door. Elk Ridge School. Catherine Grant, teacher. All children welcome. Inside, maps adorned the walls. Books filled shelves Matthew had built. Slates waited for eager hands. Catherine stood in the empty classroom on the eve of its opening, heart full to bursting. "Is it everything you dreamed?" Matthew asked from the doorway. "More," she answered truthfully, "because I never dreamed of having a family to share it with." That first morning, 15 children came from town and outlying homesteads. Some parents still refused to send their children to that woman's school, but many more recognized the opportunity where none had existed before. Catherine stood on the steps that first morning, school bell in hand, Matthew's gift, brass and gleaming. Sarah and Emma beside her, proud to be part of this dream fulfilled. She rang the bell, its clear tone carrying across the valley. Children gathered, faces bright with curiosity and excitement. Catherine thought of James, of how he had believed in her dream. She thought of Elizabeth, whose daughters now called Catherine Mama, with love and trust. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer defined them. What defined them now was the future they built together. 10 years later, James Matthew Grant, now 10 years old, stood with his father on the ridge where Catherine's first cabin had once stood. Matthew placed his arm around his son's shoulders. "This is where I first met your mother," Matthew said, his voice deep with memory. "She was splitting wood with that old axe over there. It was the harshest winter I'd ever seen." James looked down at the valley where his mother's school had now expanded to 3 buildings, with over 60 students from across the territory. "One day you'll take over the family businesses," Matthew said, patting his son's tool bag. "But first you have to learn how to build, to understand wood, stone, what makes a solid foundation." James nodded solemnly, gripping the hammer his father had given him for his 10th birthday. "How, Father?" Matthew smiled, eyes creasing at the corners from years of facing the Wyoming sun. "The way your mother and I did, log by log, choice by choice." And they began placing the first stones for a new cabin, not out of necessity this time, but for the lesson it would teach, the lesson of justice found, of family forged, of a life built on truth and honor in the hard land of the West. The end.